Good to see you. And September, as you know, is so crucial, the peak of hurricane season.
The right front quadrant, that northeast side of the storm, which we were on last night, is typically where you get that threat for tornadoes. Our friends down in the Outer Banks, I mean, God bless them, their lives may be forever changed in Cape Hatteras.
Tropical storm Elsa is now churning northward. This is the air mass that's moving closer to us. So for tomorrow, temperatures will struggle just to get above 60 degrees. Well, it's a cold front that moved through earlier today. Not much with it. It's lacking some moisture. We do have some clouds though moving in with a weak disturbance.
How about a whistle? If a tree falls on your roof and it caves in, you're yelling for help, you lose your voice.
Well, keep in mind for any type of disaster that you may be prone to, there is a basic kit that will have all the items that'll work in any emergency situation. The viewer wants to know, how is the weather going to affect me? How is it going to affect my family? What are the impacts going to be? Some areas could get isolated amounts of 30, even 40 inches of rain.
6 inches to reach the bottom of most passenger vehicles. Once you get up to a foot of water, at that point, that can float some vehicles. Level 4 wind restriction on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, which connects the south side to the eastern shore. That is open, but only for smaller vehicles.
They've invested $300,000 in technology for self-driving vehicles. But how would a vehicle like this do in inclement weather conditions? We're going to be bringing you field reports from in and around the state, talking about everything from climate change to seismology. Chilly 16 degrees right now here in Punxsutawney. So you wanted to be twinning with me here at the gift shop in Punxsutawney. He did not see his shadow. So everybody here is so excited because that means an early spring. And there's actually a lot of weather criteria that has to be met for this GOES-R weather satellite to launch into space. I am in Barrow, Alaska. It is the northernmost city in the United States. Behind me is the Arctic Ocean. No! Ah! Oh my God! Oh no! Studies show that the Arctic is warming at a rate of 2 to 3 times faster than the rest of the Earth. Carbon is stored in permafrost beneath the tundra, and researchers aren't sure how fast that carbon may be released into the atmosphere. Studying how animals in the tundra may influence ecological processes underground may provide some insight.
We're specifically interested in how animals, specifically small herbivores, either exacerbate or mitigate the effects of climate change.
Even on cold, rainy days like today, there is a lot of research ongoing outside of Toolik Field Station on the Arctic tundra. But did you know that something as small as a vole could possibly play a role in climate change?
We're looking at voles and lemmings. They're ubiquitous in the Arctic, so they occur everywhere. They're also active year-round, so that means they don't hibernate, and underneath the snow, they're still working. They're eating plants. They're making waste, they're clipping leaves, they're making nests to sleep in. So they have a really big impact on the tundra.
With sites in 3 regions of the Arctic, this team is specifically interested in determining how these herbivores affect carbon pools and nutrients in the tundra. They have fencing enclosures to study their impacts on plants and soil, and have also set up several grids of live traps with peanut butter and birdseed to attract the small mammals. They use a capture-recapture technique to learn more about the herbivore's home range, density, and more.
We want to know what sex they are, because that matters in terms of their effect on the tundra. A female is going to reproduce and have babies, whereas a male, maybe not so much. So we sex them. We also take some samples from them. We'll take a hair and a fecal sample, so that way we can tell what they're eating.
What exactly small mammals are eating is important because they have a big impact on carbon and nutrient cycling.
A small mammal going about its day, it's going to clip some leaves. That's going to release nutrients back into the environment faster than if it wasn't there. It's also going to eat certain plants compared to other plants. And plants have different rates at which they either store or release carbon.
A recent study in Sweden looked at the tundra after a peak year of rodents and were able to measure the difference in plants from satellite images taken from space. This gives researchers here in northern Alaska reason to believe the effects in the Arctic may be just as great.
Depending on what happens with natural populations of rodents, we can have some predictive power on what their influence on carbon exchange is going to be.
From the Arctic tundra at Toolik Field Station in Alaska, I'm meteorologist Cheryl Nelson for AccuWeather.
To Cheryl Nelson this morning. Cheryl, you've been with us all morning long, and one of the key things that you've been talking about is that tide cycle and how this morning at low tide, it was actually functioning more as a high tide, and conditions are only getting worse.
Laura, that's so true. I mean, the winds are whipping behind me right now. We still have some light rain as well, but we are starting to see that water rise starting. In fact, we have some video that we shot just a few minutes ago in Isle of Wight County, Virginia here. That's in the western part of Hampton Roads, so we're a little bit more inland, but people might not understand the tidal system here. This area floods so easily when the water levels are high. So we're showing you Jones Creek, and what's happening here is the water is coming in from the Atlantic into the bay, into the James River, and then into Jones Creek, and that is starting to come over the road and cover it. Now, that's only the beginning, okay? So what we're going to see as we push toward high tide here in Isle of Wight is around 5 o'clock this afternoon. That whole road will be covered in that spot. It will become impassable because we are seeing storm surge of 2 to 4 feet of water. There's going to be a lot of water there, and people are not going to be able to get around very easily at all this afternoon or this evening. They should be staying home. In fact, the winds are so bad here with the tropical storm force winds that we have here. That was a pretty big gust. We're gusting 40, 50 miles an hour here right now. We have a lot of bridges and tunnels in this area, and the tunnel right now connecting Norfolk and Portsmouth, called the Midtown Tunnel, that has been shut down. So when you start to see these things happening, you know it's a big deal. Also, level 4 wind restriction on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, which connects the south side to the eastern shore. That is open, but only for smaller vehicles. No tractor trailers, no motorcycles, and honestly, I wouldn't want to drive anything over that right now because we have hurricane warnings just as you go out into the Atlantic Ocean. It's not pretty here. Speaking of ocean, I want to pan over to what you can see. Guys, this is the James River, okay? We normally don't have white caps. It is not supposed to look like this. The river is angry right now, and I want you to focus on that second pier. If you can see the water, the waves, it is almost, the water's almost hitting that pier right there where their boat would normally be. And again, high tide is not occurring for another several hours. So we're seeing lots of waves, lots of wind. Rain is starting to back off here a little bit on the western part of Hampton Roads. But things are only going to get worse as we go throughout the afternoon, Laura.
Now, Cheryl, given that you have so much knowledge about this particular area, how much higher can that water go? And do you expect that second dock could potentially just go underwater here before we make it to high tide in a few hours?
That's a great question. So normally this area, when we get to about 4.5 feet at Sewell's Point on the James River, same river as this, but that's in Norfolk, that's when we start to see minor tidal flooding. Right now we're expecting it to get very close to 7 feet at high tide. So we're talking a few more feet. And if you add a few more feet to that dock, it's going to be pretty close there. So it's something that's going to be a major concern. And
right, because they've had an extreme water level rise there as well. Cheryl, thank you so much.
Theirs is to be the biggest airborne invasion ever attempted to this time.
75 years ago, roughly 13,000 aircraft took to the skies over Western Europe on D-Day. Weather forecasting was in its infancy. No computer models, no satellite, no radar. Chief Meteorological Officer for the Allies, James Stagg, relied on experience and surface observations.
We owned the Atlantic. We had bases in Iceland, we had bases in Greenland, we had bases in northern Canada, and they could all submit weather reports.
These weather reports aided Allied meteorologists in making a weather forecast for the British Isles. The weather leading up to D-Day was stormy, and German forecasters, not having the same resources, believed the weather pattern wouldn't change for weeks. Allied meteorologists, though, saw a break in the weather coming, and D-Day was planned for June 5th.
The tide had to be low at first light, because we wanted all day to be fighting.
For a successful air attack, cloud cover had to be 60% or less, and ceilings couldn't be lower than 3,000 feet. Despite pushback from American meteorologists on the Allies' team, the British forecaster Stagg convinced General Dwight D. Eisenhower to delay the invasion until June 6th, when he believed weather conditions would be optimal.
A lot was riding on the weather forecast on D-Day. I rode on this monoplane today, and even on a nice sunny day, there was turbulence. So can you imagine what those pilots felt 75 years ago?
So they're flying in the dark. They did hit some clouds. There was some stuff up there. The Germans are shooting at them very heavily, and airplanes are swerving all over the place.
They were flying us put us up at 1,500 feet. You know, it was dark. You couldn't see nothing outside.
And if that wasn't enough, the planes didn't have heat, and pilots only had fleece-lined flight jackets.
This was war, and you went out and you did it.
Although the weather during the initial hours of D-Day was not ideal with rough seas and lingering clouds, the sky cleared as Stagg expected, making way for the largest aerial operation in history.
If Stagg was wrong, wow, it's revisionist history. I think it would have been slaughter. So give a lot of credit for the success of D-Day to a meteorologist.
For AccuWeather, I'm meteorologist Cheryl Nelson.